In relation to our teacher, founder of Triratna, Sangharakshita, and in a way we're looking at these four lineages from the aspect of, in a way, his legacy, what he's left, his gift to us, to help us practice. And in a way there are four components, there are four ways of making sure that we can practice effectively. So today we're looking at inspiration, which in a way you could say is a necessary fuel to drive our practice, to move our practice forward. There's teachings, in a way the ideas, perspectives, insights to guide our practice, guide us along the path. There's practices. How do we embody the teaching? It's not something just about in our heads. How do we actually embody and live the Dharma life? And then there's also, slightly interestingly, there's institutions and responsibilities. In a way, there's a lineage of how we relate to each other, how do we communicate, how do we share and practice the Dharma together and provide the supportive conditions for our practice. So that's what we're exploring over the next 4 weeks. I'm very happy that Padmajata's joined us and is going to start us off this exploration. Because this is sort of looking back at Sangharakshita's life, is just over 100 years ago now he was born, we wanted to ask people who really have been practicing, have been involved with the Triratna for some time and have a feel for Sangharakshita's teaching. So actually I worked out today that all four people who are going to talk over the next few weeks, which includes Padmajata and I, we've been practicing for more than 40 years. In fact, I first got to know Padmajata in the 80s in Manchester, where we first got involved. And knowing someone for 40 years, I've seen that Padmajata is someone who has practiced consistently and worked with her spiritual life in a very consistent way, and I think that's revealed now. But I know that in order to work that consistently, you need inspiration. You need the fuel, you need the drive to apply yourself in that way. And from that basis, I'm really looking forward to hearing what Padmajata has to say about inspiration and how she inspires herself and others. Yeah.
Thank you, Katie and Roger. Okay, so you start with a short meditation. Okay. Well, the first bit, I was going to say something about the four lineages. So I won't do that, but I think I will say, actually I didn't bother to look this up, but it was some years ago that Bhante gave a talk about the four lineages, which I think would have been to the order, probably on an order day. And, what was he doing? Well, I think he was trying to help us understand a bit how Triratna functions. I mean, Triratna is really an alive organism. It's multi-dimensional, it's multifaceted, it's changing all the time as people flow in and out, as we adapt to new conditions in society, as we go to new contexts. Triratna is sort of going to more and more countries all the time. So maybe he was trying to get at, although there is this adaptability within this living organism, there is also sort of flows of continuity going on. And these are the four lineages, which, as Ketu Raja mentioned, inspiration, practices, responsibilities, stroke institutions, and teachings. So with the lineage of inspiration, Bhante's talking about the living transmission of the Dharma through inspiring individuals, both in history and in the present. And it includes figures living like you and I are living. And it also includes mythical archetypal figures, such as, say, Amoghasiddhi, the dark green Buddha of fearlessness. So it's a lineage of people, beings, we could say, both human and beyond human, whose experiences and teachings motivate us and help us deepen our connection and then practice around the three jewels. So I think a really important point in this lineage, and this is true actually in the other ones as well, is that it's not one person or one archetypal figure or text that we're drawing on. It's an ongoing stream of insights, experiences, reflections, people's energies that keep the Dharma alive and relevant for us now. Well, not surprisingly, we find that the first person in this lineage of inspiration is the Buddha. And Bhante was very keen that we focus attention on the Buddha and get to know him. So it's a question to ask ourselves, I think, do I find the Buddha inspiring? If I do, in what way? Are there particular qualities which come across to me that I could try to emulate? Or is it more certain teachings which he gave? Now, teachings, of course, are important. So just to give an example for myself, the 5th verse of the Dhammapada, which you probably know is a very important early text, has always been very important. Hatred is not pacified by hatred in this world. It is pacified by love. This is an eternal law. And as someone, me, I mean, that's had to work with a lot of self-hatred towards myself and towards my mother, this verse has, carried a strong message. So teachings spoken by the Buddha clearly are very important, or meditation practices taught by the Buddha. But can we broaden this out to include the Buddha himself, as it were? The Buddha is someone having certain qualities, that inspire us and sort of activate us. Now, in the Bodhisattva Ideal series of lectures that Bhante gave in 1969, which people do in the 3rd year of their Mitra study, if any of you are Mitras, Bhante makes it clear that we can't leave the Buddha out of Buddhism. Now, you may think to yourself, what a silly thing is Padmajata saying, or perhaps what Bhante was saying, who would leave the Buddha out of Buddhism? But actually some groupings in Buddhism down the ages have sort of either perhaps through highlighting really teachings, but not necessarily, if you like, the personality of the Buddha, or alternatively by highlighting the archetypal realm of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Do you see what I mean? They maybe have not a very great connection to the historical Buddha himself, the Buddha. So we need to try to get a flavour of enlightenment by tuning into the Buddha. We might do this by sitting quietly at home, perhaps in front of our shrine if we have one that has a Buddha image on it, or perhaps there's a quiet area at home where we normally meditate. Maybe we have some flowers there or something, and we could just try and imagine being with the Buddha. Maybe we're sitting in a group of people around the Buddha. What would that be like? Is he silent? Is he talking? Is he gazing at us? Just sort of trying to feel what that's like. Could we sort of let him in, be receptive to the mystery of who he is? Now, for myself, I find reading stories of the Buddha acting in various compassionate, fearless, or creative ways, just to name a few qualities, very inspiring. And this helps me get a sense of the Buddha's qualities. So I've always found it really moving, the way the Buddha reaches out towards people from all walks of life and connects with their Buddha seed, their potential for growth. He finds that potential everywhere. Fired by his vision of beings like lotuses at different stages of growth, and the knowledge that some people are going to be able to grow when they hear the Dharma, the Buddha compassionately seeks out the potential for enlightenment wherever he is, and he makes efforts to nurture it. He's unremittingly inclusive in this compassionate action, and he completely ignores any societal stigmatizing views about who is or who isn't worthy. What matters to the Buddha is, can he connect with their potential? So we find in the Pali Suttas, the Buddha's talking to lepers, small people, widows, outcast people, prostitutes, people with little or no status in society, probably even despised by society, as well as the nobles and the ordinary folk. I'm always very moved by stories of how a few words from the Buddha coupled with his amazing presence, transform people who are mentally disturbed. Now, this links to my personal background of growing up with a mother who was very mentally ill, and also I worked in the field of mental health as a social worker with mentally disordered offenders for many years. So there's this amazing story of Padmajata. She was driven into a terrible mental state from her experience of multiple deaths in the family, and she doesn't wear clothes or walk in straight lines. That's how it's described. She's so unaware of herself. Now, this may sound like it can't be true. Aren't those Pali Canon people exaggerating? But I've worked with people who are so distressed and so psychotic. They are, really totally unaware of who or what they are, and they're acting in very bizarre ways. So anyway, it's a sort of fantastic drama. Padmajata is in a village where the Buddha is visiting, and she's sort of moving towards him, but not in any purposeful way. And the village people are trying to keep the Buddha away from her as, well, I don't know, they probably think she's a terrible embarrassment, she's lowest of the low, being the person that she is. Maybe they don't want him bothered. So anyway, they're sort of trying to shepherd the Buddha away. And then other people are trying to sort of steer Padmajata out of the way. But anyway, the Buddha is having none of this. He must sort of perceive in some way what's going on. He approaches her, and through his incredible presence, he says just a few words, "Regain your awareness, sister." And Padmajata comes to her senses. She realizes she's naked, or almost so. She's ashamed. Somebody in the crowd throws her a cloak. And she then goes for refuge to the Buddha, and in fact becomes one of the most foremost enlightened women disciples, and helps many, many other women practice the spiritual life at that time. Another story involves the Buddha actively seeking out Sunita, an outcast man, someone known as untouchable. It's really hard to imagine what it was like being an outcast or untouchable person at the time of the Buddha. The level of oppression and stigmatization by society was just so extreme. The Buddha is so radical. I mean, he completely rejected caste, and many times he speaks about how it's what a person says or does, or how they behave, that determines what kind of person they are, not what caste they're born into. Now, as the lowest of the low, Sunita's job was to collect the poo and wee of the caste people in the village, and then collect it in the morning, and then dispose of it somewhere. He had been taught that even his shadow could pollute a caste person. And he'd never met the Buddha, but he'd heard about the Buddha, and he feared polluting the Buddha. So when the Buddha came to his village, he just kept sort of running away. But the Buddha kept appearing before him in beautiful golden light. Eventually, Sunita opens up and goes for refuge, realizing that all that horrible stuff he is surrounded with or smells of is really not who he is or who he can be. So he becomes a homeless wanderer. The Buddha sees the fundamental beauty of Sunita underneath all that muck, the beauty of his seed of enlightenment, which the Buddha knows is capable of flourishing. So I found in my life that I feel passionately about not leaving anyone behind, not excluding anyone in this great cosmic drama of enlightenment. And this inclusivity and a wish to reach out with the Dharma to all in an active way, this urge to share the inspiration through the lineage of inspiration flowing ultimately from the Buddha, has been a part of Bhante's vision for Triratna right from the beginning. It's part of who Bhante is. Order members don't have to teach. However, we are encouraged to find ways of sharing the Dharma with others, reaching out where we can. And this active sharing spirit has enabled Triratna to become a worldwide movement, now in many, many countries, as you know, reaching many people. Triratna has a huge presence in India. And this came about from Bhante reaching out to the Dalit communities, previously known as the ex-untouchable communities, after untouchability became illegal. And this was after the sudden death of Dr. Ambedkar in 1956, about 6 weeks after the mass conversions to Buddhism of hundreds of thousands of people which Dr. Ambedkar had led. Now, the new Buddhists were in great turmoil and Bhante stepped in to give many talks and teachings, which eventually led to Triratna emerging in India. And there, people talk about the Dharma revolution, as going for refuge to the three jewels has led people to feel completely differently about themselves, similar perhaps to Sunita, and also has led to a massive sort of social uplift for people. And about half of all order members are Indian, in case you didn't know. So we all need to find ways of connecting to the Buddha, connecting to the mystery of enlightenment itself, moving around the world, as it were, above and beyond any particular teachings that we're drawn to, and letting that connection influence our Dharma lives. Now, there's other people from history that Bhante has drawn great inspiration from, and who he's pointed us to in various ways. For instance, perhaps many of you already know about the Triratna tree of refuge and respect, which is here in this painting. It's got lots of figures on it, and of course you can't see it if you don't know it already. But there's many figures that we could find inspiration from, maybe their teachings, but also their qualities, their lives, how they lived. And if you're not already familiar with the book by Kulananda, Teachers of Enlightenment, which has a little section on each figure in the painting, I really recommend that. So over here we've got some of the Buddhist disciples who were great characters in their own right, as well as being enlightened like the Buddha. So Ananda is very inspiring, in that he comes across in the Pali text as being extremely kind, generous and friendly. When the Buddha is on his deathbed, he rejoices in Ananda as having been loving in his body, speech and mind towards himself, the Buddha, for the many years, 20 years I think, of their close companionship. The Buddha and Ananda are archetypal spiritual friends. And also in that 5 that are on this sort of lotus over here of historical enlightened people at the time of the Buddha, there's 2 other disciples who are sort of archetypal friends, Moggallana and Shariputra. And so in our movement in Triratna, Bhante has emphasised the value of spiritual friendship and the way that we grow so much through our connections in the Sangha. And this is rather a unique emphasis in the Buddhist world. And then also in that grouping, we've got Dharma Dinner, a famous female Dharma practitioner who was a very brilliant Dharma teacher. So she's credited with a sutta which explores the spiral path, the path moving up to freedom. And as you may know, in Triratna, Bhante has made a big emphasis on us practicing, not just in terms of reducing or eliminating negative mental states, such as greed, hatred and delusion, but also of developing more and more love, more and more generosity, truthfulness, contentment, awareness, and so on. So that's why in Triratna we have the positive formulation of the precepts that we chant regularly, not only the negative formulation. And Dharma Dinner's sutta is an important part of this. And again, it's a bit of a unique emphasis in the Buddhist world. So we also have teachers of the past. There's all this lot of people up there who have been described as spiritual geniuses, often reinvigorating the Buddhist tradition in which they practice with fresh inspiration, maybe become rather stale, rigid, formalistic or something. So for myself, I'm particularly drawn to Padmajata, an 8th century Dharma practitioner who went to Tibet from India, and he helped get the Dharma established there. As a figure, Padmajata is very mysterious, and he seems to cross the boundary between history and myth. He's associated particularly with meeting and overcoming demons and other very negative energies. He is the figure that I have as my yidam, which means I do a visualization meditation about him. So he's been very effective in helping me meet my demons, those dark energies of self-hatred and also hatred towards others. Although now I don't experience hatred, I am someone who has strong tendencies to quick negative judgments, irritation and impatience, and calling on Padmasambhava to help change myself in these areas is very effective. So Padmasambhava also helped me greatly in working for many years as a social worker with mentally disordered offenders. The dark energies or demons can be alive in such people in various ways. The terrors of past abuse, the tormenting voices or sights of the current mental illness. These were people who were severely mentally ill. Cravings for substances, guilt about the offences in which someone has been seriously harmed, desperation about being locked up for long periods, anger about a sense of it not being fair. So I felt very much that I was trying to tread in Padmasambhava's shoes by relating compassionately to the demons in these people's lives and psyches, and sometimes by forming a connection I could earn their trust and maybe through cooperation find a way with them to move forward, which in some senses meant perhaps after many years a person was able to leave the Sigil hospital. So Bhante was also very inspired by Padmasambhava, whom he encountered in a temple in Darjeeling in the early 1950s. One of his teachers, Kachu Rinpoche, who gave him the Padmasambhava sadhana meditation that we do in the order, also gave Bhante the name Urgyen, which can mean different things actually, but one meaning is belonging to Uddiyana, the land, perhaps the mythical land where Padmasambhava was born. So in one of his autobiographies, Facing Mount Kachenjunga, where Bhante's talking about a lot of time when he's in India and Kalimpong, Bhante says, "As I entered the temple, all the greater was the shock, therefore, when I saw in front of me 3 or 4 times larger than life, the mighty sedent figure of the semi-legendary founder and inspirer of the Nyingma tradition, a skull cup in his left hand, a staff topped with skulls in the crook of his left arm, and the celebrated wrathful smile on his mustachioed face. All this I took in instantly, together with the lotus hat, the embroidered robes. Having taken it in, I felt that it had always been there, and that in seeing the figure of Padmasambhava, I had become conscious of a spiritual presence that had in fact been with me all the time. In other words, that magical figure had activated, at a very deep level, a part of me that hitherto has lain dormant and unrecognized. Although I'd not seen it before, it was strangely familiar. It was as familiar as my own self, yet at the same time infinitely mysterious, infinitely wonderful, and infinitely inspiring. Familiar, mysterious, wonderful and inspiring it was to remain. Indeed, the precious Guru was to occupy a permanent place in my spiritual life. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but apart from the 4 main festivals celebrated probably by all Buddhist groups, Buddha Day, Dharma Day and Sangha Day, linking with the Buddha's enlightenment, his first teaching and the creation of the enlightened Sangha, together with Parinirvana Day, when the Buddha died physically. In Triratna we have one more festival, which is Padmasambhava Day. Actually, this is coming up quite soon. In a fantastic talk by Bhante from 1979, it's clear that for him we need inspiration from Padmasambhava, not just to work on our own dark energies or demons, or those of people we're in close connection with. We need Padma's inspiration to enact a radical transformation in the world. And this spirit of radical transformation in the world has been a major theme of Triratna from the beginning. Yes, we need to transform ourselves through our individual commitment to go for refuge, and we need to work at having very deep harmony in the Sangha so that the collective organism functions effectively, and also there needs to be a reaching out to the world. Some of the modern demons we are working to counter and radically transform are materialism, consumerism, cynicism, passivity, hedonism, blaming others, and pseudo-egalitarianism. All these and other deeply held wrong views lead to enormous amounts of suffering. We only have to turn the news on for 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, to get a sense of the tremendous suffering in the world, which perhaps we can contribute to, inspired by Padmasambhava. Bhante was also very inspired by his 8 main teachers. They're sort of down the front. most of whom came from the Tibetan tradition, but one of them was a Theravada bhikkhu and one a Zen practitioner. So Bhante drew inspiration from the whole of the Buddhist tradition from early on. And one of his major works, A Survey of Buddhism, which was published in 1957, shows his broad vision about the way the different schools and groupings of Buddhism relate and harmonize together as various expressions of the same transcendental vision, wisdom and compassion of the Buddha. Now this was at the time, and still is, a really radical way of looking at things, as many Buddhist groups would look at what makes them different to other groups, not to say what makes them better or best in their eyes in terms of Dharma practice. And we could say this harks back to the Buddha's inspiration when he says to his foster mother, Maha Prajapati, when she is confused about how to practice, the Buddha says, if something conduces to generosity, calm, contentment, wisdom, love, and so on, this is the Dharma, this is the Master's message. Now the lives of each of these teachers is worth exploring as a source of inspiration, and we've got Culananda's book, we've got Bhante's own book called Precious Teachers, and actually fairly soon, a bit unclear when, there's a new book coming out by Dayanandi. They all had fascinating and deep things to say, and it's who they are, how they live their lives, how they practice the Dharma that's also really inspiring. Dado Rinpoche, for instance, a particular friend of Bhante, used to get up very early to do 5 hours of meditation before working all day in the Tibetan cultural school he'd set up in India for the children of people from Tibet who had come to India after the Chinese invasion. I may not be doing 5 hours myself, but it's worth reflecting on that, isn't it? That actually he felt he needed to do a lot of meditation, if you like, to nourish himself before then doing his work in the day. And Yogi Chen, a Zen meditation master, he was rather eccentric and excitable apparently, sometimes dressing in a cowboy costume and sometimes dressing in a formal Chinese scholar's dress. Anyway, Bhante really appreciated his clarity and says in the midst of all his eccentricity there was an absolute clarity of understanding. He clarified things that no one had been able to clarify. We also have the mythical and archetypal Sangha, the many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who express different aspects of enlightenment. At the top, you probably can't see this, we've got Vajrasattva, the sort of a primordial Buddha expressing the primordial purity of the mind, and we've got the 5 jhinas or 5 Buddhas underneath, representing enlightened qualities such as compassion, generosity, stillness, fearlessness and insight into the nature of reality. And then over there there's a group of bodhisattvas who are sort of representing enlightenment in process. So we may find ourselves attracted to one or other figure. Perhaps we meet them when we go on retreat. We may be drawn by the colour or the gesture or something the figure's holding. At ordination, we take a visualization meditation or sadhana for a particular figure who expresses enlightenment for us. And I've already mentioned that for me this is Padmasambhava. Bhante received many sadhanas from his teachers, and he had especially strong connections to certain figures, such as Green Tara, representing fearlessness and compassion, and Manjushri, representing insight and wisdom. He also had a very strong connection to Amitabha, the ruby-red Buddha of love and compassion. And when he was in his 20s wandering in India, before he went to live in Kalimpong, he was staying in a cave near an ashram that he was visiting, and he had a spontaneous vision of Amitabha. So he says, "One night I found myself, as it were, out of the body, and in the presence of Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light, who presides over the western quarter of the universe. The colour of the Buddha was a deep, rich, luminous red, like that of rubies, though at the same time soft and glowing, like the light of the setting sun. While his left hand rested on his lap, the fingers of his right hand held up by a stalk a single red lotus in full bloom, and he sat in the usual cross-legged posture on an enormous red lotus that floated on the surface of the sea. To the left, immediately beneath the raised right arm of the Buddha, was the red hemisphere of the setting sun, its reflection glittering golden across the waters. How long this experience lasted, I do not know, for I seemed to be out of time as well as out of the body, but I saw the Buddha as clearly as I'd ever seen anything under the ordinary circumstances of my life. Indeed, far more clearly and vividly. The rich red colour of Amitabha himself, as well as of the two lotuses and the setting sun, made a particularly deep impression on me. It was more wonderful, more appealing than any earthly red. It was like red light, but so soft, and at the same time so vivid as to be altogether without parallel. So it's this form of Amitabha that we would do as a sadhana in Triratna, rather than the traditional one where Amitabha is sitting with hands folded in his lap. And I hope this quote sort of gives a sense of what we're trying to do in our sadhanas and also in our lives, our Dharma lives. We're trying to make contact with enlightenment as a living presence. Enlightenment is happening now, as it were, enlightenment outside space and time, so that inspiration can flow into our Dharma life. And in this case, we also have the lineage of inspiration flowing not only through Amitabha, but through Bhante directly from his vision. And actually, I've been doing this sadhana a little bit, as well as Padmajata over the past few months. It's very beautiful indeed. So through all the figures on the refuge tree, starting with the Buddha and his enlightened disciples, and moving through the teachers of the past, to Bhante's teachers and Bhante himself, together with the archetypal enlightened Sangha, we can connect with the flow of inspiration that is the lifeblood of the tree. We are standing in front of the tree, but also we are the tree if we connect to it in a deep way and let it really influence us. The end.